Hey, my name is Dylan Mathis. I'm 20 years old, and I am a freshman at Surry Community College. When trying to think of a topic for this speech, I definitely wanted to focus on something a little bit more unique to me, and as such, I pretty much had an idea right away of what I wanted to do. And that was, of course, this. Now, I'm sure this doesn't need much of an introduction or explanation, but this hearing aid um, is a representation of about 4 years of me being deaf. While I myself have adapted along with both my family and friends during that time, it still proves to be problematic here and there, and that's why I thought it would be an interesting introduction to me. So, naturally, this condition can prove to be quite a hindrance in everyday life, but I can't deny that the way it came about was just absolutely funny. About 4 years ago, in March 2017, my friends and I decided that we were going to go explore an abandoned building at night. Of course, earlier that night, my hearing went out in my left ear with no explanation, just absolutely gone in a moment. Of course, I didn't realize why until many years later, and I learned that it was a viral infection of my inner ear. Of course, that was a little too late, and my hearing was gone by that point. But all I knew that night was I was very horrible at sneaking and being quiet. My friends were trying to, make sure I was quiet, trying to say, hey, shush. And every other second, I was asking questions about what they were saying. It was a relatively awful time. But of course, I had just assumed that night I had an awful cold or something that was stopping my ears up. But I later realized that my inability to hear would affect much more than just the sneaking around that night. Because unfortunately, this proved to affect quite a bit of my life. Most teenagers around 17 or so are trying to further themselves and work towards being out of their comfort zones, right? For me, that took a lot longer, a bit longer at least, as even a trip to the register would be met with scorn for me. I wasn't really one to go and challenge anything, and I wanted to definitely be in my comfort zone. But I've never been one to bother people, so repeating over and over that I was hard of hearing or deaf just seemed like way too much effort and too much for me. But despite this, I still didn't decide to get a hearing aid until well over 2 years had passed that point. So this is around about 2 years ago I got this. Of course, that didn't mitigate the problem, me getting this. I still have to stop everything to hold my phone up to my working right ear, for example. But it did help me to work past the inevitable feelings of inadequacy that come along with such a change. I definitely didn't feel up to doing most things that other people were up for. I've gotten over that since then, thankfully. And I will admit it helped me to not be afraid to mention my deafness as much, too. That's definitely a plus. But with that said, my family surely have their part in that as well. I'm thankful that despite my mom's tendency to push and pester, like, every other mom in existence, she waited for me to be ready to get a hearing aid. Despite the obvious differences, I would liken the experience to something alongside someone trying to usher their family member to go get chemo, because despite the benefits being obvious, you know that the person has to be willing and ready to go do something like that. So I like to compare it to something kind of close to that. I finally found the reason when I decided I would rather not bug my friends as much anymore about not hearing what they said, and that was what, prompted me to go actually get my hearing aid. So, I got this hearing aid from the Costco Hearing Center in Winston, and despite the mundaneness of it, I was actually happy to hear a shopping cart the aisle over. My family still have to accommodate for me, though, of course. If I'm wearing earphones, I'm definitely not going to hear them unless they make it obvious, for example, but it is a welcome change. I'm also thankful to my girlfriend, who, despite this, is willing to exchange written notes during a movie instead of talking, and is willing to learn a tiny bit of sign language alongside me for those situations where people would normally just whisper. I can't do that, so it's either showing her my phone with a note on it or something close to it, but sign language would definitely help with that, and I'm glad she's willing to put up with me for that reason. Radios are never turned up too loud, and my hearing aid batteries are always present both in my bag and in hers. I've always appreciated that. But I definitely wouldn't be as lax as I am now with this without her, definitely, and without my family. And though I have made countless jokes about my condition, about this, even before I knew her, as I've always dealt with things with humor, it's still just gotten that much more lax since then. I'm just very appreciative. But that said, I'm thankful I've remained positive, and I'm thankful it's not worse, because it definitely could be. But I'm most thankful for all the people that put up with my huns and whats, as without them, I would probably just be as lost and confused as when I started. But that being said, I'm thankful. Anyways, thanks for listening to me. That was my cultural artifact speech. It's kind of weird doing it over a recording like this, but I hope it wasn't too awkward. I'm just trying to get back into the flow of doing speeches again. Thanks for listening. Appreciate you. Adios.